Today we're talking about ambiversion, which is a topic that we get a lot of questions on because people don't like to feel limited or boxed into the I versus E dichotomy when they take personality types, and a lot of people feel like they fall somewhere in between on that spectrum. And we're here to kind of clear up a lot of the questions that we get about ambiversion and hopefully help you guys come to a new understanding of what that term means and how it applies to your own personality.
Tests where they're testing on dichotomies, and they have like the little gauge of the E versus the I. So then some people get like, oh, well, you know, I'm like 52% extroverted and 52% introverted. And so I'm somewhere, you know, like between ENFP and INFP in a sense. And from previous videos, you've already like stated that dichotomies are not necessarily the foundation of Myers-Briggs cognitive functions. Say, for example, like, although my type as an ENFJ, I've seen that ENFJs and INFJs can look very similar when they're developed, but then when you look at the cognitive functions, although you can have FE as my dominant function as an ENFJ, although I can have FE and I as my auxiliary sort of meet each other like almost at the same level, my tertiary and my inferior function will never be at the like same level. My inferior function is always going to be my weakest one. So I can get my dominant and auxiliary to become like a little bit even to the point where it's like, I can't tell if he's an extrovert or an introvert. But then when you look at my tertiary and auxiliary, my SE will always be stronger than an INFJ's, and an INFJ's TI will always be stronger than my TI. But yeah, a lot of the confusion usually comes from like people like seeing that, oh, well, I'm both an extrovert and an introvert. I like people, and I also like to spend time by myself, and that's actually just a key component of being a human being.
Like, there's this quote by Albert Einstein that goes, there are two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing's a miracle, and the other is as though everything is. And I like to take that approach to introversion and extroversion and say there are two ways to look at ambiversion, and one way is that nobody's an ambivert, and the other way is that everyone's an ambivert. Everyone has both introverted and extroverted characteristics, and that's how we arrive at that cognitive breakdown. So what I think people don't understand when they first take a test and it tells them you're an introvert or an extrovert, they don't understand that you have this cognitive makeup that is, no matter what your type, if you're an INTJ, if you're an ESFP, whatever it is, you have both introverted and extroverted characteristics. But what introvert versus extrovert measures in personality tests that are based on like Jungian or Myers-Briggs model, it measures which cognitive function you process things with first. So, for example, as an ENFP, I use extroverted intuition first, and then I use introverted feeling second. So I use an extroverted function and an introverted function to take in the majority of the world around me and process it in a certain way. But it's about where I'm processing things first and then where I'm processing them second. So if your dominant function is an extroverted function, then it means you're always going to be processing things first in a way that relates to your external environment or your external world of ideas or whichever kind of extroverted function you're using. And then second, you're going to take a step back and think about how you're going to process that internally using whichever function is your introverted function. But you're going to do both those things. It's just about what order you do them in. And the order is never going to change. So even if you, like Denzel was saying, you start developing your introverted functions if you're an extrovert, or your extroverted functions if you're an introvert, which will happen as you age, you're still going to be processing them in the same order. So an introvert is still going to want to process things internally first. An extrovert is still going to want engagement first in whatever form they find that in. So it's more about what order you're processing things in than how you're processing everything. Because you can't have a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. That would just be ridiculous.
On Personality Hacker, they have this thing called the car model. And they pretty much say that like the driver is your dominant function. And then your auxiliary function is the co-pilot. And then they call the tertiary a 10-year-old, and then the inferior a 3-year-old.
What that means is that you're always going to have two modes of processing, one that's primarily extroverted, one that's primarily introverted, but you have to look at which one you're using all of the time, which one you're constantly processing, and then which one you're able to take a step back from when you need to, and that you're not always naturally in tune with. And that's a good way to tell what your dominant and what your auxiliary function is, because that's a big question that a lot of people have. They can tell you, like, okay, I know I'm using FE and SI, but I don't know if I'm an ISFJ or an ESFJ. And a good way to look at it is just which of those things can you detach from? Can you take a step back from the people and the responsibilities and commitments you've made to people? Or can you take a step back more easily from the organization of that? And look who's back. Another good way to tell is what the order in which you prefer to process things, because a very simplistic method I like to use is, I read once, extroverts leap before they look and introverts look before they leap. And while that doesn't necessarily mean that extroverts are always irresponsible and they're always doing things without thinking them through, because that's not true, it does mean that for extroverts, at least this is true for myself, and I'm interested to hear what you guys think in the comments, I find it more interesting to process things once I have some experience under my belt, and then I can go through and root through that experience and go, okay, here's what I know now, and here's why this happened this way, because I can think back on what happened, and I can use that to process things. Versus when I talk to introverts, they tend to express that they prefer to think through those hypothetical scenarios before they happen, and that's where they feel most comfortable acting from, is once they've determined, okay, this is kind of going to be most likely to go this way, or maybe this is the best way of proceeding, then they feel more comfortable making their decision or acting. Whereas for extroverts, it tends to happen, I think, in a slightly different order, where the processing tends to follow, not even necessarily the action, but the extroverted, whatever you did in an extroverted way, whether it's forming an idea or acting or interacting with someone.
If you have been able to develop your auxiliary function, then you have built, if you're an extrovert, then you've built up your internal world. And if you're an introvert, then you've built up your external world perspective. But there's always going to be one that's most natural for you to engage with. There's going to be one that you are naturally directing your energy towards. And so extroverts will naturally direct their energy towards the external world, trying to put things out into the external world, engaging with the external world, while introverts will more likely focus on engaging with their internal world and building into their internal world. And then as they develop their auxiliary function, so as an INFJ starts to develop their FE, then they're going to start becoming more outgoing. They're going to start, trying to implement these awesome plans that they have in their NI into society, and start using their FE to create harmony and build more helpful social construct and everything. While for an ENFJ like me, after they've already been doing all these social constructs and everything, when they start developing their NI, they start spending more time with themselves. Okay, what is a better, more effective, more long-term way that I can actually help society than what I'm doing right now? And that's spending time in your internal world so that you can go out and, implement, put more of a currency behind whatever power that you're putting out. You do not want to be someone who's totally introverted and does not engage with the external world or with people or information in the external world in any way. And you do not want to be totally extroverted where you don't even spend any time with yourself, because then I posted the other day, I was if you can't even spend time with yourself, or if you don't even like yourself enough to spend time with yourself, then how can you expect other people to like you enough to spend time with you?
But by that definition, everyone is literally an ambivert, because you could not be 100% of the time extroverted. You have to sleep. You have to be in a room by yourself sometimes. You have to process your thoughts. All of that happens internally. And the same with introversion. You have to speak to people. You have to interact with other ideas. You have to take in things from your environment. And all of that is happening externally.
Your personality type is not your identity. I know people who toss MBTI because they believe that, oh, well, you know, since it forces you to be either extrovert or introvert and I'm ambivert or whatever, then this doesn't apply to me. And it's like, well, no, not really, because now you're overvaluing the tool.
That's exactly it. That was all so well put, because I think what it comes down to is the fact that we confuse personality with behavior, and they're not the same thing. So
Yes,
people have
yeah.
these ideas of extroverts as always out there being crazy and wild and doing things and taking huge risks. And then they have these ideas of introverts as always sitting at home reading books and avoiding people. And neither of those describe extroversion or introversion, because those are behaviors. And what
Yes.
extroversion versus introversion is about is how you're processing information.
And so it's nothing about behavior, but it's all about what function you're using as the dominant. And I think that's why we always say, like, make sure you learn about the cognitive functions. The dichotomies is a good place to, like, you know, pretty much start. That's like the beginning of MBTI. But the real gold is in the cognitive functions. And once you start learning about those, then you can understand, like, which one you identify with the most. And then you'll be able to understand, like, why you may identify as an extrovert or introvert, or even why you might have thought that you were an ambivert, because now you'd identify what your auxiliary function is in that sense. So guys, make sure that you share this with your friends, whether it's the video or the information, whichever. And if you hear your friends talking about ambiversion, now hopefully you have some like some information on how to, like, you know, clarify, or like, you know, where to send them to help, you know, clear that air up, and hopefully just kill off that term. Thanks for watching today. So once again, I'm Denzel.
And I'm Heidi Priebe, and we'll see you next week.
For sure.